thank you for those attending tonight. This is the first collaborative presentation with the Sassoon Sephardi Synagogue and also the Victorian Sephardi Association. So any members of those organisations, you're very much welcome. And hopefully this is the first of many Sephardi topics that we'll be able to present to you. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you've got any questions, please post them in the chat box, which is on the right-hand side of the Zoom screen, and Max will attempt to get through those questions after David's presentation. Now, speaking of our presenter, David Mendoza is a board member of the Sephardic Research Foundation and co-host of the twice-monthly Sephardic World Lectures. He's also a trustee of A Nação Hebraica, a charity that trains AI to transcribe Portuguese language documents. He's also an administrator of the Sephardic Diaspora Group on Facebook and convener of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Great Britain's Anglo Special Interest Group. David's a professional genealogist with a background in business consultancy, and he's featured on Who Do You Think You Are?, BBC Radio, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and other international media. His personal ancestry is Western Sephardic, Litvak, and Polish Jewish, a nice mix there. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Bernie. This is an absolutely enormous topic. So what I'm going to try to do is to give something, an introduction to Sephardic genealogy for those who are more familiar with Ashkenazi genealogy, and also hopefully to give some tracks for people who are researching their Sephardic ancestry. So who's Sephardic? I mean, there are really two definitions of this term. We can say people who belong to a Spanish and Portuguese Jewish diaspora community, and we can also say people who are, for want of a better word, religiously Sephardic. That's to say people who follow the traditions that come out of Spain and Portugal, notably the Shulchan Aruch. And these second communities are found, or were found, mostly in the Islamic world, and both definitions are valid. So I was given the task of talking about this subject, particularly with reference to the community in Melbourne, which I understand is partly Iberian Jewish, and we tend to subdivide this community geographically into sort of Morocco, North Africa, Ottoman Empire, and the Atlantic world, and we'll discuss that a bit later. Iraqi Jews and the Iraqi Jewish diaspora in the British Empire, and also the Egyptian Jewish community, which actually, obviously, despite the historic connections of Jews with Egypt, really only got going in the 19th century. So let's start with the totemic year of 1492. 800 years of war between Christians and Muslims came to an end with the Christian victory. Christopher Columbus set sail, and this is the year that the last remaining Jews in Spain, in Castile and Aragon, were given the choice to convert to Christianity or to leave. And generally speaking, this is the date understood as the start of the Iberian Sephardic diaspora, because prior to that, there were local communities with local identities. Only later in exile did they form a sort of umbrella identity. So the Iberian Sephardic diaspora, genealogists tend to understand it geographically as comprising three parts. We have Megorashim in Morocco, the Maghreb, and North Africa, notably in Algeria. We have the Eastern Sephardim in the Ottoman Empire, the old Turkish Empire in East Mediterranean. And we have Western or Portuguese Sephardim inhabiting what we call the Atlantic world. So places like London, Amsterdam, New York, Jamaica. And we will look in greater detail, first of all, at all of these. And what I'm planning today is to very quickly look at the histories of the communities from which the Melbourne community emerges, and then to look at genealogical sources for them. And we can start in Morocco. Obviously, Iberian Jews lived in Morocco before 1492. Famously, Maimonides and his family fled Islamic persecution and ended up in Morocco a couple of hundred years before the expulsion. There they encountered local Jews known as Toshavim, and these were Berber and Arabic speaking. Probably the Arabic speakers were descendants of Berber speakers, and there's some genetic research going on at the moment. The Sephardim were known as Megarashim, Hebrew for exiles. Most of them spoke a dialect of Spanish called Hakatiya, although the Fez community adopted Arabic as the lingua franca. To give a very, very quick overview, the Sephardim tend to settle in cities, particularly coastal cities, and this is the theme we're going to see throughout our talk today, because Sephardim are mercantile people. Morocco is unusual within the Arab world, perhaps because it's so far connected from the main centers, and because there has been a single dynasty in power for centuries, whereas in most Arab countries we have a change of government every decade or so. With respect to the modern era, 1912 is the critical year, because in this year the French and Spanish established protectorates. That's to say, they just moved in and took over much of Morocco, with an international zone in Tangier, because the British were concerned to protect their trade routes. And these protectorates lasted for 44 years and were important in the evolution of the local Jewish community. And to look at from the angle of the local Jewish community in the 20th century, we've said that Morocco was less anti-Semitic than most of the Arabic world, but they still had anti-Semitism, and especially with the rise of the Zionist movement. And in 1948, we see people leaving, emigrating to Israel. In 56, with Moroccan independence, we see people going to France, and also going to other places, to Israel, to France, to America, and so on. And in the 1960s, what once had been a community of hundreds of thousands was reduced to mere thousands. Now, I'm not the person to say how these people, some of them arrived in Melbourne, but I'll just make some observations that there must have been reasons that people chose not to go to Israel, France, and the United States. Often we see this is because people already have a relative, or they know somebody somewhere, and that's an incentive to move to that particular place. And also it could have been just opportunities or a fresh start. And obviously if you're in the old world, to go to Australia is the perfect place for a fresh start. It's on the other side of the planet. So if we look at the what I'm calling Eastern Sephardim, they would just call themselves Sephardim. This is the Ladino, Judeo-Spanish community of the former Ottoman Empire, of the former Turkish Empire. And this is when most Jews talk about Sephardim, they're normally talking about this particular community with their pastries and music and so on. I think we should first of all just remind ourselves what a huge state the Ottoman Empire was. It covered all or part of 40 modern countries. It was, one of the world's great empires. With respect to Iberian Sephardim, they started arriving in 1492 during the reign of Sultan Bayezid II, probably almost certainly coming via Italy and or North Africa. And the main center of settlement was around the Aegean. So we see major communities established in the capital, Constantinople, today's Istanbul, in Salonika, which was a Ladino-speaking city, today Thessaloniki in Greece, in Smyrna, today Izmir, in Andriopol, today Edirne, and on the island of Rhodes. There were also, of course, communities in Eretz Yisrael and some in the Balkans as well. But mostly we're looking at people living in major port cities. And the Jews had, like many Christian communities also, they had a degree of independence, internal independence in the Ottoman Empire. This was called the millet system, as peoples of the book. And I think we should say that Jews suffered, and indeed Christians suffered from dhimmi status, which, depending on your politics, either made you a protected person or a second-class citizen. But Jews were allowed, for example, to hear cases between two Jews in front of a bet din rather than the Islamic court. So, and the community was led by the Sephardic chief rabbi, the Hacham Bashi, in Istanbul. To cover the 19th and 20th centuries in about a minute is going to be a challenge. But what I ask you to think of is the Ottoman Empire, this enormous empire, at one point literally stretches to the gates of Vienna. It is a Sunni Muslim Turkish empire. In Europe, it is ruling over Orthodox Christian people. So we're talking about Greeks, Serbs, Montenegrins, Bulgarians, Romanians. And these Orthodox Christians are poorly treated and hate the Muslims and the Turks. Russia, also Orthodox Christian, is a rising power and is supporting independence movements for these people. And essentially what we see in the long 19th century, essentially going up to the First World War, is these Orthodox Christian peoples establishing states, ethno-states, nation states, for themselves, carved out of the former Ottoman Empire. So if, for example, you are a Jew living, say, let's just take one of these cities in Bitola, in Monastir, in what's today northern Macedonia, but became part of Serbia. You were once a satellite community of Salonika, but now a border has gone up. You are living in a Serbian ethno-state, and you don't belong to that ethnicity, that religion, that language group. And of course, the Muslims have all been chased out. And you were a satellite community of Salonika, but now there is an international border because the Greeks have now taken Salonika, and you're on the Bulgarian side of the border. So what we see in these communities is an emigration as these communities suffer a degree of discrimination and recession. And later we see the same in the Islamic parts of the Ottoman Empire. So we're looking at Asia and North Africa, and we see the rise of Arab, often pan-Arab nationalism or local Arab nationalisms and Turkish nationalisms. So you know, life was good for the Jews in a relatively good in a multi-ethnic empire, but in nation states less good. And that's of course why we start to see emigration. And of course, some of these people end up in Australia. The third of the three Iberian Sephardic groups are the Western Sephardim, the Portuguese Jews, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. We're mostly interested in the London community. This is a photograph of my synagogue, Bevis Mars, because most of them are in Australia, in Melbourne, obviously from the London community. So Jews had come to England with William the Conqueror. They had been expelled in the medieval period by Edward I. And during the Cromwell period, during the Republic, there was Cromwell saw that their commercial rivals, the Dutch, especially the city of Amsterdam, was benefiting from the Western Sephardim, who were forming trade networks, literally sort of global trade networks that crossed the religious borders between Catholics and Protestants, and between Christians and Muslims. And the Jews were bringing great wealth to Amsterdam. So Cromwell, also for religious reasons, invited Jewish settlement in England, particularly, of course, in London. And if you have many of the Jews actually came from Amsterdam, and if you have Anglo-Sephardic ancestors and you run out of data, then the next place to look always is Amsterdam. And this was a well-integrated community. That's to say, they weren't living in their own areas. They were living alongside their Christian neighbors and behaving like their Christian neighbors. And I suspect that the first Jews to arrive in Australia, both Ashkenazi and Sephardi, were people who were transported there, obviously from the 1770s. The colonies in now what's the United States were in revolt, and they needed somewhere new to send their prisoners to. And indeed, in my own family, we have this. This is the Regency prize fighter, bare knuckle boxer, Daniel Mendoza, who was champion of England in the 1790s. And no less than 3 of his children were transported to Australia. One was a thief, another was guilty of grievous bodily harm, and one of his daughters was following a certain profession, let's say. And they have descendants to this day in Australia. I'm not sure if they're in Victoria, but of course not all the Jews went there under a cloud, and some chose to emigrate. I actually know that there were in my family members of the Mendoza family who I think migrated to Victoria, I think to Melbourne. And not very many, because remember, the London community was never more than a few thousand people. And then, of course, post-war, there was some Jewish 10-pound poms who found their way to Australia. So that's the Iberian Sephardim. Let's have a think about the Iraqi Jews. So Abraham came from Mesopotamia, so we have a long connection, and obviously Babylonia has Jewish connections for millennia. Most obviously, the Babylonian Talmud was written there. But we'll start our history much later with the conquest by Suleiman the Magnificent, who absorbed Baghdad into the Ottoman Empire and more or less held it. Mesopotamia was always this border area fought over first by the Romans and the Persians, and then by the Ottomans and the Persians. And the community there did well under the Ottomans. And we just remind ourselves that it was sitting on the old east-west trade route. So if you were exporting products from India or Persia or perhaps even China beyond, you would normally be sending it overland, and that would go through Baghdad. And indeed, from India, if you were sending product by sea, it would normally end up going up the Persian Gulf to Basra, and then be taken up to Baghdad. So Baghdad was an important trading city, or at least it was until the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, and this massively disrupted traditional trade route. So once products had gone from the east to Baghdad and then on to places like Damascus and Aleppo and the Mediterranean, it was now much cheaper and safer to take your products through the Suez Canal by sea. And so we see a decline in the Baghdadi community and people leaving, including, of course, some going to Egypt, but some going to further points. So Suleiman Magnificent's successors were not quite as clever as he was, and they supported the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, in the First World War, and essentially their empire was then chopped up. And here we have an image of the British Army, obviously including quite an important Australian contingent entering Baghdad in 1917. And the British interest was largely, or became largely, in oil. That they were interested in oil fields in the north, in the Kurdish areas, in the oil fields in the south, in the Shiite areas, and they had friendly Sunni Muslims living in the middle, because neither the Kurds nor the Shiites were friendly. And so the British created this new state called Iraq, with the Sunni Muslims in the middle in control. And of course, nothing could possibly go wrong with that plan. And the Iraqis were given independence under the Hashemites, so the British clients, in 1932, although the British remained there. Iraqi Jews actually were quite unusual. It was a very sophisticated community, and they were really just behaving like Jews in Western countries, so that they were trying to be, good Arab citizens of Iraq. Unfortunately, Islamic prejudice and also sympathy for the Germans against the British militated against this. And in 1941, we see one of the worst massacres of Jews, known as the Fahud, one of the worst massacres, frankly, until our own day. And at this point, I think most Iraqi Jews saw the writing on the wall. And there was an airlift to Israel in 1950, 1951. And I would just draw everyone's attention to the fact that these are well-dressed people in suits, women in modern clothes, mostly without hair coverings. And so perhaps often in Ashkenazi narrative, we see Sephardic Jews as being, people barefoot and in turbans, but we're talking about a very, very sophisticated community in Baghdad, and 1 in 3 people in Baghdad was Jewish. So they came to Israel, but many were not impressed and moved on to other places. And indeed, just around the corner from the British Library is now a road named after the Dangurs, one of the number of Iraqi families that were very, very financially successful and donated to building medical research centers here. So Iraqi Jews also settled in India, particularly, I think we can say, in British India. And I'm not an expert on the Iraqi Jewish diaspora, but what I see is a logical step of, if you're merchants, you want to be further down the trade route, and what better than sending your relatives there. And so Iraqi Jewish communities were established in Bombay and Calcutta, today Mumbai and Kolkata, which were the 2 most important ports and trading centers in British India. We see more migration in the early 19th century, famously including the Sassoon family, and the community did well in India. Things changed in the mid-20th century, first of all with Indian independence. I mean, we should say that India is one of the 2 countries in the world, I think, never to have persecuted Jews. So, I mean, that wasn't the problem. I think what the problem was is that the Indian government wanted to pursue a policy of economic independence, to make things at home. And if you're merchants trading internationally, that is not good news. And then the year after Indian independence, Israeli independence, and a lot of Indian Jews moved to Israel. And in the 50s and 60s, I think, as elsewhere, we see a pattern of people moving to other places for financial advantage. And Singapore is kind of interesting. Again, Singapore was part of the British presidency of Bengal. That's to say, the British administration of Bengal in northeast India, which had its capital at Calcutta. So we might speculate that the community of Baghdadi Jews in Singapore had largely come from Calcutta. Singapore was a coking station, so where steamships would stop to take on coal, and also became a commercial center. It did well. It was on the route to China and Japan, and of course we see Baghdadi Jews also famously in Hong Kong and elsewhere. The community, of course, like everyone, fared poorly during the Japanese occupation, and post World War II, the British weren't doing a very good job in administration. Singapore got kicked out of the Malaysian Federation, and it obviously wasn't clear at that point that they were going to become the great city-state they are today. And so we see people, Sephardic Jews again, leaving there to move on to pastures new. And our final community that we are going to discuss today before looking at the genealogy is Egypt. Now, obviously, Egypt has a very long and famous Jewish history, but we are going to start in 1805 with the man pictured, Muhammad Ali, or Muhammad Ali Pasha, who really deserves to be very, very well known. I mean, this man had the dynamism of Napoleon. And what happened essentially is the French under General Bonaparte had invaded Egypt on their way to cut off the British in India. They had been themselves cut off by the British fleet. Napoleon had returned to France, and essentially the British then mopped up the French in Egypt, which was an Ottoman province. The Sultan sent an Albanian, Muhammad Ali, to sort everything out, which he did very well, and he decided that he would actually make a better sultan, which he surely would have done. And he then marched his army through what is now Israel and Lebanon and into Syria, and would have actually taken Constantinople if the foreign powers hadn't intervened. But so he was restricted into Egypt, where he was a great modernizer. And one of the things he did is he invited Jewish settlement there. And Jews came from all of the Iberian Sephardic communities, from Iraq, from Levantine communities, from Italy, Ashkenazim, and in Egypt they formed a new community, and a very dynamic community, a very sophisticated community, it has to be said. And this community, of course, benefited, whereas others suffered with the opening of the Suez Canal. They benefited a lot with the added wealth and importance brought to Egypt. The canal, of course, was the main artery of the British Empire, and the British were very, very concerned for its safety. So, expressed diplomatically, the British arrived in 1882 and essentially didn't ultimately leave until 1956, so that they could basically keep an eye on their asset. To jump ahead to the 20th century, we have anti-Semitism, as we have in lots of countries, again because of the rise of the Zionist movement, also because of sympathy for Britain's enemies, the Nazis. And with Israeli independence in 1948, Cairo got bombed by the Israelis, and not an entirely new experience, but some people find difficult to differentiate between Israelis and Jews living in their country, and we see essentially the Egyptian Jewish community being squeezed, particularly with the Egyptian Revolution of 1952. And something very important within Egypt, which actually perhaps we should have discussed in other communities as well, is many of these Sephardic Jews had foreign nationality. They had passports from the countries from which they came. They also often were under the protection of the French, the Italians, the British, or somebody else, and so had passports from that country. And the Egyptian government was essentially trying to force people to give up these foreign nationalities, which of course were their escape ticket. So many people chose to leave, having their property expropriated when they went. And this was a very successful community. This, of course, was escalated with the Suez crisis, which again brought Egypt and Israel to war. And in 1950s, 1960s, essentially, we see Jews pushed out. Today, I think there's a handful of Egyptian-born Jews in Egypt, and they're mostly in their 80s or beyond. So that is really those communities that we need to focus on. I quickly want to talk about artificial intelligence with respect to the Western Sephardi and the Portuguese Jews in places like London and Amsterdam. And then we will talk more generally about the other communities, particularly those living in Islamic states. But I think people will be curious about what we are doing with artificial intelligence, and particularly the Anação Hebraica project. This is led by David Silveira, who is an aerospace engineer from Jamaica. He lives in the United States. And what we've been doing with this project is we have been training artificial intelligence to recognize the shapes of letters and words in documents in the Sephardic archives in London. So these are documents especially from the 17th and 18th century written in Portuguese. And but we can also use it for documents in Amsterdam and elsewhere. And we have a sister project with the Inquisition archives in Portugal, and there's other projects also. Well, we'll get to Amsterdam in a minute. And essentially what's happened, well, let me show you one of the Amsterdam projects. So this is from the Amsterdam State Archives, and they've used the same process on documents written in Dutch. These are from the notarial archives, so continental Europe uses a lot of notaries, the Anglosphere doesn't. There are 20 million pages of notarial records in Amsterdam, and they have now been scanned, and the transcribus technology has been applied. So, for example, sitting at home, not in Amsterdam, here I've done a search on two of my family names, Mendoza and Castro, and this is one of the pages that has turned up from 1732. You can see the Dutch isn't perfectly translated, but pretty well. And then the next step is we just drop it into a large language model. Here I've used Claude rather than ChatGPT. I mean, these technologies literally by the month are getting better. And I told the technology to correct the errors in the Dutch and translate it into English. And you can see the text is not perfect, but near as. And I think as we proceed over the next few years, I mean, there's projects with Arabic, with Hebrew, I think with Yiddish as well, with Russian, with the Ottoman script, which is actually very difficult. It's a hybrid script. And so I hope that what everyone can see is over the next few years, we're all going to have access to infinitely more data, and data that we can access from the comfort of our homes, even if we can't read the text or speak the language. So the future looks very, very bright. So that's just a quick look at Western Sephardic. Let's kind of look at other communities. We are particularly focused on the Muslim world. And frankly, the key problem we have here is they're not very fond of us. I have never received a reply from an email that I've sent to an archive or a library in one of the Arab states. This is the Egyptian National Archives, a liberal or moderate state, I think we call it. They took the surviving Jewish archives. Some of the Jewish archives are actually in Yeshiva University in America, but most of them were in the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo, and they've basically put them in the Egyptian archives, and they're now under lock and key. So when Jewish organizations said, "Look, we're very happy to come and scan everything for you for free," they weren't allowed through the door, and this is quite typical. So a lot of what we are doing with this genealogy is we are trying to find sources that are outside of these countries. Normally, we're looking at information in Western Europe or Israel. So I'm sure that those people of Sephardic ancestry probably know where their family came from, or if not, they certainly know how to find that information. And I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, who was the colonial power in the country before they got independence? Because the post-independence records are probably unavailable to us. But when the colonial powers left, they often took their records with them. So if you were living in a country ruled by the British, for example, or protected by the British, you can find information in the National Archives. If your family was in India or Singapore, or actually even in Iraq, there might be information in India office records at the British Library, and so on. There are archives in India and so forth. In France, you've got the Archives Nationales and the Archives Nationales d'Outre-mer, which is outside Paris. And we mentioned consular archives as well. Many Jews were under the protection or had citizenship from various colonial powers. And that means that when things like births, marriages, and deaths get registered at the consulate, that in some cases wills get lodged there, and all of these find their way back to London or Paris or Rome or wherever. And these are sources that are accessible to us. They're not always easily accessible, but they are accessible in a way that we just can't get records, say from the Egyptians or Iraqis or Moroccans. If there's one thing I can persuade people to do at this meeting, it is to interview older members of the family, or indeed, if you are the older member of the family, to write everything down. And some of the questions, well, I've listed them here. Where did the family live? What synagogue did they attend? Where were family members buried? What jobs did family members do? Because often, these would have been merchants and or business people, and we can find information in trade directories and indeed trade publications, often in Western Europe. What clubs did they belong to? What languages were spoken? This is a really valuable clue. What citizenships? What food was eaten? Sometimes I know cases where people have been able to work out where the family came from because particular dishes associated that place. What documents might have been taken out by the extended family, and also get older members of the family. Mercifully, I did this. I made my late mother and late uncle sit down with the shoebox of family photographs and identify everyone within it, because otherwise we'd just be left with people that we know are somehow connected to us, but not who they are. And also DNA tests. I'm not talking about in these sort of ethnic percentages, because that's more of a marketing gimmick. But if you take a DNA test, you can find people who might be third, fourth, fifth, sixth cousins, and by cross-referencing, you can sometimes find out how you're connected, or indeed these people might have information that you don't have. Another source, which is just slowly beginning to open up, but is very challenging still, are the Ottoman records. The Ottoman State Archives are in Istanbul. They are challenging, to say the least, but they contain surely gold. There are, for example, there are census and tax registers, and we don't really know what. But this will become accessible, we hope. I mean, presumably after Erdogan has ceased being president. And also the Sharia court records. We mentioned the Islamic courts before. They will have information on court cases involving Jews. Sometimes property ownerships will be registered. A lot of these records survive. They haven't yet been scanned, and of course they're not easily accessible if you announce that you're Jewish. But you would need to speak Arabic, of course, to read them. But with the technologies, the AI that we have coming on stream, that will become easier. Another source are newspapers. I'm sure people here already know the National Library of Israel's newspaper archive of Jewish newspapers, which is searchable on screen. Is Lahore, the main Egyptian newspaper. There are national archives. I put in British Library. I think actually if you pay money, you can access that source remotely, but also the Library of Congress and the French National Archives. And I'm afraid I don't know Australia. I'm sure in Canberra or Melbourne or Sydney, there's an equivalent archive. And Eastview is a new one, which is basically trying to do the same with Arabic language newspapers. And again, in time, the AI will make this accessible. Communal records are or can be challenging because often people were forced to leave communities at short notice. Documents can be destroyed, buildings can be destroyed, documents can be scattered. I mean, my strategy here is to first of all, just do a Google search. The Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People in Jerusalem, as part of the National Library of Israel, has become the depository. It's a bit of a grab bag of documents. In Israel, you can normally find communities from a particular place, and they sometimes know where to look. The Cercle de Généalogie Juive is the French Jewish Genealogical Society. They are the experts on more or less any community around the Mediterranean. And I'm sure some of the people here will know the whole saga around the Iraqi Jewish archives. So to summarize, and I'm to finalize, and I'm sorry we've raced through. I mean, other resources are trade directories, or sometimes you can find these on Google, or you can download. The French National Archives is very good for this. The Gallica website, and especially actually in terms of trade directories, the French trade directories, the Guide Sam, are very good, and you can find out what ancestors did, where they lived, where they worked. A lot of Sephardic Jews were and continue to be Freemasons, and most of the Masonic, I'm not sure what they are, orders are outside. There were actually Masonic orders in at both Turkey and Egypt, but most people belonged to the English, the Scottish, the French, and the Italian. And you can find archives in their headquarters. Missionaries would send reports back to their missionary societies that got published. Travelers would write books. And if you're just writing up a family history, I think it's great if you just go onto Google Books and say put in the name of the town and the word Jew, and set the date for everything before 1900. You'll often find accounts of people visiting the Jewish community, what they thought of it, individuals, and so on, and that's useful. Cemeteries. The International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies has an international cemetery project, which is a good place to start. there is an effort, especially in Morocco and Turkey, to put databases online of cemeteries. Iraq, I'm afraid I don't know. Egypt is a bit of a mixed bag. So the 3 cemeteries in Alexandria are well preserved. The Great Basatine Cemetery in Cairo is in very bad state, but the American Embassy are paying for its restoration and hopefully noting those burials that they have. So that was I'm afraid, a very rapid race through those communities. I think of most relevance to Melbourne. I think I would say that very often with communities from the Middle East, as with a lot of Ashkenazi communities from Eastern Europe, people say, well, you know, there's nothing left, there's no records, everything has been destroyed. There is actually quite a lot, and a lot of it is accessible to us. Sephardim were and indeed continue to be a mercantile people, so they moved around quite a lot. I mean, you know, even in my family, we have people born in one city, married in another, and buried in a third. I think this is a mainly Ashkenazi audience. I hope that this sort of insight into Sephardic genealogy was useful. And for those people who are researching their Sephardic ancestry, I would say there's no moment like the present, and join the AJGS tomorrow. But that's all I have to say.
A couple of questions, Dave, if you've got a bit of time. There's one here from Sandra Cohen. How do we research our family history when we have very little information, no documents? My family history includes a Greek name on my maternal grandmother's side, and I found nothing on this at Beit Hatzfort or online.
Well, you would presumably start with the I don't know the Australian records. I'm assuming that Australian or Victorian census or naturalization records or something will give an indication as to where somebody was born. The Greeks actually have quite good records and the Greek government are quite helpful. A lot depends on where people were born. So that, for example, the largest community was Salonika. That was destroyed. It was more or less burnt to the ground in a great fire in 1917. But we're beginning to discover sources, for example, in Western archives and in the Ottoman state archives and so forth. It just depends. I mean, my first suggestion would be to join the Sephardic diaspora group on Facebook, which is where we all go to geek out. And there are people who specialize in Greek research, but a lot depends on the town. So Athens is different from Rhodes, it's different from Salonika and so forth. But there is information out there. Beit Hatzfort, they call it Anu, I think now, is probably not the best place to look though.
If there's anyone else that has questions, there's a few of you made statements, but does anyone have a question for David? Unmute yourself and please go ahead. Rodney, well, over to you.
That was it was a lot of information packed into a short period. And I'm sure we'll be spending a fair amount of time and digesting it and figuring out what to do next.
A reminder that this has been recorded for any of you who are interested in reviewing it. It'll be on our website in a few days' time.
And so, yeah, on behalf of the committee and everyone else watching, we'd like to say thank you very much for tonight's presentation or this morning's presentation, depending upon where you are.
Thank you. I just saw a question about, does the JGSGB have many records on the UK Sephardic community? The answer to that is not particularly. The historic records of the community are published in the 5-volume Bevis Marks records, which if your society doesn't have a copy, hopefully in a library somewhere in Victoria.
We have a copy in the library that we share with the Australian Jewish Historical Society here in Melbourne. So
excellent. The National Library of Israel has now scanned a number of documents, which is what we're using on the Anação Hebraica project. And indeed, going there, we've so far just done the earliest of the accounts books is a good place to start. With respect to the Manchester community, which was more Eastern Sephardic, I don't know if you have a copy of Lydia Collins's book on the Sephardim of Manchester. She's actually the librarian of the JGSGB and an expert in her own right, so she's probably a good person to contact. But as I say, the published 5 volumes and checking the National Library of Israel, what they scanned, is probably the best place to start. And again, to the Sephardic Genealogical Society, I suppose I should give a plug. If you go to YouTube, we've got a lot of talks on the Sephardic genealogy website. We have also a website called sephardic.world, where you can sign up for our mailing list, and the aforementioned Sephardic diaspora group in Facebook. I mean, there are several groups, but the Sephardic diaspora group is where serious discussion happens on Sephardic genealogy, and more or less everyone is there. What's unusual, especially with Western Sephardic genealogy, is there's so much material. I mean, there's literally millions and millions of unread pages in Spanish and Portuguese archives, and our society tries to operate to academic standards. So within the Sephardic diaspora group, we actually have academics as well as hobbyists and members of our community.
Rodney?
Okay, so if there are no more questions, last chance, any more questions? I think we might declare the meeting over. Thank you very much, David.